I'm going to show you how to repair damaged furniture, including missing trim and hardware like this, a foot, and even a big gouge like this. If you see something like this in the thrift store, you don't have to skip over it anymore. I'll be demonstrating these 4 different repairs, but they are all going to start with one product, this amazing mold putty kit that will help you make a mold of your missing area. So I got equal parts of A and B, and I'm just going to mix these together, mix them really, really well. And then you form this over the piece that you're trying to make a mold of. So in this case, I'm going to start with this piece of hardware. You want to mix these up really well until they are uniform in color, and you have 3 minutes to work with it. Then I'm going to take my piece of hardware and I'm going to make a little mold. So you're just going to stick that in there, and you want to make sure that it's going into all the crevices. So push pretty hard. And I don't want this little thing here, so I need to make that a hole. This firms up in about 20 minutes, so I'm going to set this aside and do my piece of trim. The trim is going to be the exact same process. I'm just getting a little bit more of that putty because this has to cover a large area on my missing trim that's on my other door. Once I get this completely mixed up together, I rolled it into a long snake-like form like you used to do back in the day in art class to get this to form the right shape over my trim. Make sure you're covering the whole area that you need to replace your missing trim, and press pretty firmly down on the putty so that it's nice and tight against the trim so there aren't any air pockets and you get the correct shape. After 20 minutes, your mold will be firm and you can go ahead and remove it from your furniture. Before I make my new piece of trim, I'm just going to make sure that the mold I made is long enough. My hardware mold is also ready too, so I'm going to remove my piece of hardware and set everything up to create my new pieces. Okay, so my molds are all set and ready to go. I'm going to use a fast setting epoxy to make this process go a little bit faster. It's a 2-part solution. You mix equal 1 part A, 1 part B, and then I'm going to pour it in my mold, and it sets up in about 10 minutes. Whether you're working with this material or another, please make sure you read all your safety instructions and that you are following their guidelines for wearing your personal protection equipment. I poured the epoxy in the molds, making sure not to overfill them, and let it set for 10 minutes. Yes, perfect. It worked, but obviously I need to cut all this excess off. And I like to work with it when it's still kind of bendy because it's easier to get onto your furniture. This is why you want to be careful not to overfill, but if you have any overspill like this, it's very easy to trim off those excess pieces. And then I'm going to hold this up to the door and trim it down to size so it will glue on and fit the existing trim. And this takes a little back and forth. I'm using these really sharp scissors, but you could also use a razor blade. Just keep chipping away a little bit until it lines up into place. I recommend using a fast setting wood glue so that you don't have to use a lot of clamps and it's going to stay in place. Once I had my trim in place and it was completely dry, I added a primer, and then in between the coats of primer drying, I added a little bit of wood filler into the seams just to make it look cohesive. Once the primer was dry, I added the paint to the entire dresser. And don't forget about my little hardware piece that I made as well. I took this out as the same time as that piece of trim and cut off this excess. These can be painted or stained or dyed. It works better if you do it right after they set. So since I'm gonna gild my hardware later on, I'm gonna grab my gold gilding wax and put this on. This turned out really nice, and once I gild the rest of the hardware, it's all gonna match perfectly. Just to remind you what we were starting off with, here is the missing trim as well as the missing hardware. When you look at the final repairs, you cannot even tell that these were once missing. This looks great, and now let's move into the next repair. This is the foot that I'm going to be repairing today. It's missing a big claw out of the middle. Lucky for me, these feet actually detached. So I'm going to make the mold of my foot that is intact. So I am just cleaning that off, making sure there's no dust, no greasy residue so that this mold will stick to it well. This is the kit that I'm using. It's the Amazing Mold Putty Kit. And it comes with a side A and a side B, and you just get equal amounts of both compound and you start mixing it together. You want to mix it together until it is uniform in color. And you don't have to worry about wearing gloves or protecting yourself with this because this stuff is actually really safe. You can actually make food molds and molds for cakes and candy with these, so it's really safe to just use with bare hands. Just like the first makeover, I'm going to roll this until it's uniform. Roll it over the original piece that you are trying to recreate to make a mold of it. And like I said, you have open time of 3 minutes to kind of form and play with this. Then you're just going to set it down and let it cure, and it's going to take about 15 to 20 minutes to completely harden up to make your mold. I just wanted to show you, here's what I'm trying to recreate versus making the mold, and you just want to make sure that you're covering the whole area that you're trying to repair. So here I am after 20 minutes. The mold came off super easy once I was able to just kind of pry it away with my finger. It is pretty strong, so you don't have to be super delicate with it, but just be careful. You don't want to rip it and ruin your mold that you just made. So I just tested it out on what I was repairing and it fit in there nice and snug. So my next step is I'm going to fill it with some wood filler. I'm going to be using Bondo wood filler. This is like the 2-piece system that gets really hard really quickly. It's great for repairing big gouges and chips and things. And so this is a 2-piece system. You put the putty down and then you put the hardener in the middle. You need to mix that up really well until you have a uniform color. The stuff hardens very fast, so you need to be done working with it within 3 to 5 minutes of starting the mixing process. So try to move as quickly as possible. So I'm just scooping up my wood filler mixture and then I'm putting that into my mold. Make sure that you're pushing this into all the crevices of your mold and that you're completely covering it before you put it into place. On my channel, you normally see me use that wood filler that just comes in a tube. That is not strong enough to do repairs like this. You really want to use a 2-step wood filler like this. I think Minwax has one too. So once I had my mold all filled, I just got it on place on the foot where it needed to line up. It'll kind of pop into place, and then you can see at the bottom I had a little bit of a gap where I didn't have enough filler, so I put a little bit more wood filler in there on the bottom. And then I'm just going to set this aside to dry. This stuff, like I said, hardens and dries really fast. If you were just filling like a typical hole, you could sand it in 15 minutes. But since this is such a big repair, I'm actually going to let this set overnight and then I'm going to come back and take a look at it. Okay, so this is the next morning, and I just want to remind you, I didn't have to put anything in the mold to get it not to stick. It just comes off really actually easily. I was surprised how easily it comes off. I was just a little bit delicate with it because I didn't want to break my claw or anything. But then, I mean, it looks pretty good, but I looked at the bottom and I didn't get enough filler into the very tip of that claw. So like I said, make sure when you're filling that mold that you press all that filler in there. So I had to do a quick little repair. So I'm just adding a little bit of filler to the bottom where I missed that spot. And then I cleaned off the excess that kind of squeezed out. And then since this is just a smaller repair, I let this set for about 20 minutes and then I came back and checked on it and it looked great. So the repair is all done, but now we need to clean this up. So I'm grabbing a 4-sided wood rasp and file. You can find these just at the hardware store. I've had this for a really long time. It has different coarse levels on it from going to coarser to finer. So I start on a really coarse level and try to break down a lot of this excess that's sticking up. You want to file as much of the places where it connects to the original piece as you can. You really want it to be like feathered and smooth and not look like you fixed it. You want it to look like it's seamless. So you kind of just have to go in here with this rasp, use all the 4 different sides, carve it down as much as you can. And then to finish it off and make it look even more seamless, I took a 150 sandpaper and just rubbed it down until those edges were nice and smooth and feathered. It's also a good idea to have the original right next to you while you're doing the sanding and feathering so you can make them look as close as possible. Here is a close-up of my repaired foot next to the original, and I think they look pretty similar. And once the repair was made, I added the feet back to the secretary and made over the whole thing with some paint and primer. You can also stain this wood filler too, but it is going to be a lot less noticeable when you paint it. This repair turned out great. Now I'm going to show you this same technique on a different problem. Cut a big chunk out of the top, so I'm going to use a silicone mold and my Bondo. I let it dry for about 20 minutes, then removed it and cut off the end piece so I could flip it and create a new piece for this side. For this part, you want to use a really strong epoxy or 2-part wood filler. Once I have that all mixed up, I just add it to my mold and then place it on my piece. This stuff sets up really quickly, but when I'm doing a big repair like this, I typically let it set overnight, and then I come back in with a wood rasp and shave down as much as I can and then sand it to be nice and smooth with the piece. This one got painted as well, and if you want to see these full makeovers, I will link all the videos down in the description box along with all the products you can use to make your own repairs. I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you guys next time.